Today's procurement teams have to meet a dizzying array of internal and external challenges. They must be responsive and risk resistant. They must respect and even improve the environment and be as inclusive as possible. They must serve the needs of internal buyers, global suppliers, and the bottom line. And perhaps most importantly, they must achieve all of this seamlessly and efficiently. But the foundation for procurement success, and I think its future impact, is data. And yet, using accurate data to drive decision-making remains one of our greatest challenges. And so, we partnered with Sievo and Buyers Meeting Point to take a deep dive into procurement data ecosystems. In this special series, Kelly, Barner and I will explore how procurement leaders can meet their analytical requirements while also exploiting the full cross-functional value of data. Data that serves as the foundation for enabling corporate growth and competitive advantage. And so every 2 weeks between April and July 2021, Kelly and I will speak with senior level executives at Risk Methods, Basware, Supplier.io, EcoVadis and Sievo, companies at the forefront of the procurement data revolution. All of the episodes in this series, in addition to an ebook that accompanies the series and that is written by Kelly, can be found at artofprocurement.com/data series. That's artofprocurement.com/data series. In this fourth episode in the series, Kelly speaks to Pierre-Francois Thaler, the co-founder and co-CEO of EcoVadis. Kelly and Pierre-Francois deep dive into the topic of sustainability, discussing the different scopes, organizational models, and ways of tracking, certifying, and reporting on investments in sustainability. So let's go into the show where Kelly asks Pierre-Francois how he defines sustainable procurement.
So, sustainable procurement, it's about taking into account not only price, cost, quality in decision factors, but also new dimensions such as environmental performance, social performance, human rights, ethics, and it's looking at the, responsibility of practices of suppliers as well as the sustainability of the product. So it's taking into account green and taking into account social and human rights factors in your procurement decisions.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you something about COVID-19. It's changed a lot of things this year, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts about how the crisis has either affected sustainability initiatives or has affected the way large organizations view their investments into sustainability.
Surprisingly, the COVID crisis has accelerated sustainability efforts of companies in general and sustainable procurement in particular. Surprisingly, because many companies, one could think that many companies will start to focus on short-term, cost savings and so on, and not longer-term sustainability. Our partners at Bain Consulting released a study a couple of weeks ago where 50% of firms globally were saying they maintain their sustainability investment, 25%, 30% were increasing, and just like a very small percentage were putting things on hold. I think this is due to three things. The first one is we saw with COVID that resilience of companies and really resilience of supply chain was really important, and companies were investing in the health and safety and the right social practices for the staff were more resilient than others. That's number one. Number two is what's happening on the financial market. There is a huge influx of money in what is called ESG, environmental, social, and governance funds. Investors all over the planet realize that ESG stocks, the more sustainable firms are better performing the crisis than others. And maybe number three, it's about all these new political decisions around green stimulus, green recovery, the 900 billions of euros invested by Europe in green projects in the next couple of years, something maybe happening in the US. So overall, we've seen a very large acceleration of the sustainable procurement programs, certainly more acceleration than what I've seen in the previous 12 years of EcoVadis.
Well, and it's interesting. We've actually heard similar things in conversations about supplier diversity, obviously for slightly different reasons, but we've seen a similar trend. From your perspective, Are supplier diversity and sustainability initiatives complementary? Do they compete? Do they each work better when they're both working together? How do those two types of initiatives tend to interplay in a company?
So diversity and non-discrimination and workplace equality and all things, it's one of the dimensions of sustainability. For EcoVadis, we have a global framework with 21 criteria ranging from greenhouse gas to anti-corruption, and diversity is one of those 21 criteria. So diversity is indeed very much one part of the broader sustainability agenda. What is a bit specific is in North America, you have a very distinct or different agenda which has been existed for a couple of years around suppliers diversity, which is very focused on a very specific US definition of diversity, which is around of ownership of firms, whether they are veteran owned or women owned or minority owned, and then it's more a parallel initiative in a way. Very often in North America, the titles in large corporates will be, director of supplier sustainability and diversity. So it's like a bit of a parallel initiative, but generally, diversity is one of the component of sustainability at the whole. And when I look at the main, maybe what are the three burning topics in terms of sustainability overall. One is climate change. Second one is biodiversity, and collapse or biodiversity challenge. And the last one is around equality and equality and respect of diversity or defense of diversity in different forms or different organizations.
So that's an excellent background, sort of in terms of how the enterprise as a whole tends to see, certainly sustainability, but if they break it out separately, sustainability and diversity. When we think specifically about procurement's interaction with sustainability initiatives, how do you think it works with the efforts that we're also trying to make around digitalization? Is it something that should be sort of on the digitalization agenda? Is it a parallel type of initiative? What role, or let me put it this way, what opportunity do companies that are either starting out or solidly into the middle of a digital transformation journey have around sustainability that they should take advantage of?
So those topics are really closely interlinked. Those topics of sustainability and digitalization, for a couple of reasons. One is, if you want to really scale up and if you want to have a very, scalable, sustainable supply chain agenda, you need to leverage digital. You cannot engage with thousands of suppliers. You cannot engage with suppliers without using technology. That's a very important way of doing things. We saw it in a very vivid way in 2020 when, for example, we got lots of calls this year of companies where we used to have who have very large on-site audit programs. They were flying auditors in factories all over the planet. Of course, this couldn't happen anymore because of travel ban and because of not being able to access factories. So digitization of the supplier assessment process, became the only way to do. And also, I don't think that after this crisis, we will go back to flying auditors all over the planet again for, carbon footprint reasons. So, if you want to drive a more sustainable supply chain, you need to leverage technology and sustainability is also pushing you to digitize some processes, which would be very, not very efficient from a carbon footprint point of view. So it's IT for green or green for IT. You've got lots of links between those two dimensions.
And it certainly makes sense that, especially when you mention the scalability challenge, right? These large organizations have so many suppliers. And even if it's only a relatively small percentage of them that fall underneath the sustainability umbrella, it's still an awful lot of companies globally that you're trying to keep track of. And it strikes me that there's also probably an opportunity, just like we talked about the crossover between procurement transformation or digital transformation and sustainability, that probably some of our investments that are being made right now around either risk or supply chain visibility, there's probably also some opportunities there as well. Do you tend to see, particularly in large organizations, that the team that is in procurement focused on transformation is the same group as would have responsibility for increasing visibility into the supply chain, or does that tend to be a separate team that they need to collaborate with?
When you said transformation, are you talking about procurement transformation, or are you talking about
Procurement transformation? Yes.
Yes. No, but typically in most of the large, corporates, we see, reporting to the CPO. We see procurement excellence, where you have all the new processes from, So procurement excellence is reporting to the CPO, and in procurement excellence, you will have digital, you will have, sustainability. You might have another team in charge of supplier risk, or maybe it's linked with sustainability. So yes, though those teams are. If you want to transform companies, you need to use digital. Sustainability is one of the big drivers pushing companies to rethink their supply chain, moving their supply chain to different locations, changing the type of strategy there for specific materials. So yes, you have strong links between those.
Now, speaking of risk, that's been an enormous topic this year, but it's always been incredibly important for large organizations, and there's many different categories of risk. I'm actually interested in any, either insight you have or conversations that you've had that reflect the risk that associations feel around starting a sustainability initiative or declaring publicly that they're going to start a sustainability initiative, and then worrying that they're not going to be able to follow through. Right? Is that a conversation that you've been a part of? Are those concerns that you've heard that will say, okay, we're going to go very public and say, this is something we're going to do, or we're in a regulated industry and we must do this? Are there concerns that companies face about not being able to successfully execute the type of sustainability program that they want?
Yes, of course. That's a very interesting point. So the first, sustainability and sustainable supply chain, it's both risk management, it's both an opportunity you want to capture. And of course, companies want to pursue the opportunities of increasing revenue through more sustainable products, but they don't want to be caught back, or hit by negative press, because they will not have clean up their supply chain or manage the basics. So I remember a couple of years ago, we were working for a large energy, power manufacturing and energy company. They were developing aggressively their wind turbine and solar business. And the CEO told the teams, "Hold on, we need to make sure that we have a good grasp on our supply chain, because we don't want to start communicating on the fact that we're moving from coal and gas-fired power plants toward wind and turbine. If in the news in a couple of weeks, all this campaign on the sustainable products is being ruined because you have news about the non-sustainable practices of some of the suppliers in our, for example, wind turbines supply chain. So we see many companies hesitant to communicate, before they have started to really, manage the more basic risks, in their supply chain. The reality that you need to do both at the same time. You will never have 100% control of your supply chain. You take Apple. Apple is doing amazing things on recyclability of new iPhones and all the packaging and so on. But and they have amazing efforts also on supply chain due diligence. But they were hit by some negative news last week. When there were allegations of I think it was overtime non-overtime payments in some of their factories in India. So you will never have full control, and you don't want to wait till you have full control to start, launching or capturing opportunities by launching new sustainable products or communicating about this. So you need to have both the defensive and the offensive agenda, at the same time.
Now, how about ownership structure? Listening to you talk about some of these different decisions that have to be made. Obviously, sustainability needs to have a dedicated voice somewhere in the enterprise. Is it something where there should be one executive whose sole focus is sustainability? Should it be a subset of the domain of a chief procurement or chief supply chain officer? Underneath them, should there be someone dedicated? What are some of the best practices or most effective ownership structures that you've seen for sustainability?
You mean ownership structure? Where should sustainability be held in the organization?
Yeah, where should it be held? And is it one person? Is it a distributed set of responsibilities? What have you seen work best?
What we see typically is a relatively small team, small sustainability team at the corporate level, reporting not into the communication director or to the, but rather directly into the, to the CEO, but then have most of the muscle and power in the different functions. So in particular, sustainable supply chain should be reporting into the chief procurement officer and not to the sustainability director. We've seen most of the programs on responsible sourcing and sustainable supply chain, which were sponsored by sustainability, fail because sustainability didn't have the mandate and didn't have the process to engage, thousands or tens of thousands of suppliers, whereas the best practice is to have, chief procurement officer, sponsoring everything related to, supply chain and maybe the, operations director looking at the own, manufacturing. So yeah, it needs to be, it needs to be distributed. For the best practice is to have it distributed and, close to the front line and close to the, businesses.
And from a performance measurement standpoint, are there relatively standard KPIs or way of measuring and tracking performance against sustainability goals that you see? I mean, and certainly qualitative as well as quantitative, right? Because anybody that's doing a well-rounded approach to sustainability is going to have both. What are the metrics and KPIs you tend to see?
So that's a very big question, and it's a very big debate at the moment. If you're talking about the broader, all the sustainability KPIs, which can be used by a corporation to report to its shareholders or stakeholders, you have a number of standards out there, like GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, SASB, Standard Accounting Standards Board, I think. ISO 26000, because ISO is doing it well. You have a big, I would say, big fight or big competition at the moment for what will be the winning standard, plus hundreds of country-specific or sector-specific standards. If you're buying road freight in North America, you have specific KPIs which have been defined. If you're buying printing services in France, you have to look at some others. So it's still quite complex. I think one of the success of EcoVadis is that we were able to make this easy to understand for purchasing managers by giving them a simple score for each of their suppliers. We rely on what are the most, best practice or what are the most relevant standards in each spend category in each country, but we we translate everything into a simple numerical score on a 0 to 100 scale. And indeed, it's a real science, and it's a real. It's quite complicated to stay on top of those evolving standards. You don't, it's a dynamic world, and everyone is discussing this at the moment at the United Nations and in different EU and different bodies, but. It's still fragmented, and but at least for procurement use case, we are trying to simplify this by providing a easier tool for purchasing managers, allowing them to compare their suppliers from a sustainability perspective.
And I have to imagine that it's sort of a double challenge, that companies and procurement teams are both trying to understand, okay, where do I stand today? How am I performing right now with my existing supplier base? But then they also want to have a positive impact on that going forward. And so understanding the relative difference between, if I take a straight cost look to whatever this category of spend happens to be, versus if I bring in sustainability as a secondary factor, how can I, look at my total cost of ownership, my ROI to the organization as a whole. And so understanding how selecting different supply partners allows them to pull different levers and have an impact on how they do against some of these different sustainability metrics. I have to imagine those are sort of two separate but equally important challenges.
Yes. So you have two things. You have first the supplier side, because you want to, sustainable procurement is about you want to work with responsible suppliers, and you have the product side. You want to take into account the environmental impact of your products. Mm-hmm. So if I take the supplier side, you can also divide into subcategories. Because as I was saying previously, you want to manage risks, but you want also to capture opportunities. So what we typically see organizations saying is, let's say you have 50,000 suppliers, you will identify which of those 50,000 are the most high risk from a, size or country perspective. And then the rule is, okay, we want to make sure that none of our suppliers has a sustainability score below, 25 out of 100, because that's an unacceptable risk for the brand. Mm. So that's the defensive strategy. Make sure you don't work or you stop working with the suppliers who are not aligned with your, corporate values and with the CSR standards. The more on the opportunity side, it will be more looking at your top 1,000 preferred and strategic vendors, the very important suppliers, and saying, what can we do to make sure that going forward, those suppliers will be in the top 10%, of their industries. We want to work with the best supplier in packaging from a sustainability perspective. We want to work with the best supplier in road freight from a sustainability perspective. So we have customers looking at our ratings and saying, okay, for preferred vendors, we want to make sure that they are in the top percentile of their respective sectors. When it comes to products, it's more about finding quantitative KPIs around environmental impact. So what is really being pushed a lot at the moment is carbon accounting. It would be looking at the carbon impact of a specific product. We see companies using now internal tax system or internal accounting figure for carbon, saying, the cost of carbon will be, for example, estimated at 50 euros a ton. And in their procurement decision, they will compare products, taking into account the relative carbon impact of different products, so that they really factor this in their decision to choose, material A versus material B, or computer A versus computer B.
So, and if I take what you've just said, which is really interesting, and sort of say it back to you in another way, what you're saying is that sustainability provides a number of different opportunities for procurement to have an impact on different parts of the organization that we might not otherwise get to work with. So, for instance, if we have, if not all, at least a significant ownership stake in whatever type of sustainability tracking and monitoring platform is being used by the organization to manage that data, then we can collaborate with sales and marketing to ensure that updated sustainability figures and initiatives and progress are being included in that outreach message. And we can also be collaborating with design, research and development, depending on what type of company and industry you're in, to ensure that they also understand maybe some of the new materials. Can we explore moving to one of these that has a different type of carbon impact, for instance?
Yes.
Is
No.
that
No, that's a very important point. You can look at it two ways. You have what can procurement do to support the company's sustainability agenda, and what can sustainability do to help procurement being more visible or help strengthen the role of procurement. So the first one is, kind of what everyone is looking at. It's obvious that it's obvious. We realize that 80% of the environmental impact, 90% of the human rights violations are in supply chain. So, procurement can do a lot to help companies becoming more sustainable. But what is interesting indeed is we see more and more that, sustainability can also be a way to increase the role of procurement. So you are mentioning, making sure that procurement can have a very interesting discussion with the product design or marketing, and not be seen only as a, cost-cutting department. That's one area. You are mentioning spend under management or extending access to different type of spend. We've seen procurement teams using sustainability as a way to engage with, for example, marketing department and try to manage, bring this sustainability, perspective on marketing vendors, and then we're able to extend their role with marketing, whereas previously, marketing was not really seeing much value in involving procurement in their marketing decisions.
in anything, really? Actually, if I think if marketing had their say, they would, except maybe at the company Christmas party, they would never have anything to do with procurement. When you think about the differences in B2B organizations versus B2C, what are some of the differences and maybe even some of the similarities that you observe between the way these two types of companies approach sustainability and also how they communicate the progress that they're making?
So that's also interesting. You will think that B2C companies are much more advanced when it comes to sustainability and responsible sourcing than B2B companies, because from a brand perspective, they're more exposed to direct to consumers or to the end customers. What we've seen at EcoVadis over the years is actually more a mixed picture, where some of the most advanced and sophisticated programs were actually developed by B2B companies. When we started with EcoVadis, our first customers were in the manufacturing sector, packaging, heavy materials, some automotive OEMs, and so on. And I think one of the difference is B2B company, they tend to have a much more sophisticated procurement or sophisticated approach to supplier relationship management than, let's say, retailers, for example. When you're in retail, you're far less involved in supplier development and supplier performance management. It's more about, binary or shorter term relationships, or deciding to, select this type of, product versus another. Whereas when you're in automotive, you've got a real, ingrained tradition of looking at quality metrics, and sustainability is really an extension of this total quality management approach. So B2C companies would tend to, communicate more about this. They were maybe the first to start, because they were the first exposed. But some of the most sophisticated and most interesting programs we see actually with B2B companies.
And that is interesting, and it's my own procurement background is actually in retail, and as I listen to you talk about that, one of the things that it makes me wonder. So I did work for a very large grocery retailer in the U.S. It was the chain owned by Ahold, based in the Netherlands, and assuming this is at least true relatively across retailers, the big thing was the initial formal procurement function that we had was almost predominantly based on indirect spend. And so that was part of what contained our role in different types of initiatives. Do you see that indirect and direct spend have equal opportunities to be involved in sustainability? Or based on the types of materials that are involved, does direct spend tend to be a better place to start or a better way to have a bigger impact when a company is getting a sustainability initiative rolling?
No, so companies are obviously starting first with direct spend because that's where most of the impact will be. That's where most of the reputational risk will be, maybe. Uh, so, a lot of the focus is on direct spend, but we start to see in the past couple of years companies realizing that indirect spend is a huge challenge because it's hugely fragmented. Tens of thousands of smaller vendors, which are also creating high, reputation risk. That you have very different type of sustainability risk from one category to the other because from IT to janitorial services or sea freight, they are very different, and that's also changing to address because you have less leverage than on direct spend. So we are doing a lot. We see very large programs in indirect spend. We also see. We take the example of apparel retailers. You have some very famous apparel retailers in the US. They on the direct side they only have 200 factories, and they have like 200 auditors working on social issues for 200 factories. So they are doing like thousands of audits a year. At the same time, there are 50,000 vendors on the indirect side, and they are not doing anything. And or they realize now that instead of having 99% of the effort on direct spend, maybe they should take a bit more balanced approach. So yes, so for EcoVadis, indirect spend is a very important area due to the fact also that you need to take a category approach. You cannot use the same type of audit protocol and same type of questionnaire that you are using for your direct contract manufacturing factories if you want to assess let's say sea freight where you don't even have factories to audit, so you need to take a different approach.
Right. Now, when we think about the role of regulation, obviously it's different by geography, it's different by industry, it's different, as you said when we first started talking, sustainability is not just one thing. It includes a lot of different types of activity and metrics and quality standards that companies have to be aware of. In places where regulation does apply, and that ends up becoming a driving factor for some type of investment in sustainability, does that tend to force a large company to get an operation in place or frameworks in place or ownership in place? Does it tend to create a jumping off point where they start to focus where they're required to by regulation and then they expand out from that? Or do you tend to observe where, anytime you involve governments, things get so much more complicated that companies say, okay, I am required to do A, B, and C by law, and it is so cumbersome and so costly and so complicated that, I'm just going to keep doing exactly what I have to keep doing. Is the role of government, are they driving investments and progress? Are they teaching companies what not to do when they move into sustainability in areas that they're not legally required? What have you observed around that?
So I have mixed feelings or mixed perspective around supply chain sustainability regulations. First, we've seen an incredible acceleration in the number of regulations related to supply chain sustainability. Started with things in the US like California Transparency Act, the UK modern slavery. Now you have you will have a very big one in Europe. But, it's expanding all over the planet, and now more or less the concept of you are responsible for whatever happens in your supply chain from a human rights or environmental perspective. That's becoming the norm. So I have a mixed feeling about this, because very often those regulations push companies to have a tick the box approach to this by saying, okay, let's do what we need to comply with the regulation, even if it's a bit absurd in our case. We are required to produce a statement, so let's produce a statement. We are required to produce a risk matrix, let's produce a risk matrix. And also, instead of having sustainability be a differentiator for companies, so that the best in class can really differentiate from the others, it's creating not level playing field, it's not the right word, but it's nivelé, as we say in French. It's averaging things.
Okay.
No, what is good is when regulations start as an accelerator for companies to decide to trigger a program which they could have postponed, for a couple of more quarters, a couple of more years, and then they decide to have a broader program. Regulation is only a tipping point, or is only a factor for them to decide to launch, but then they take a much broader approach, much more strategic perspective to responsible sourcing and sustainable supply chain. So, in France, for the past 2 years, we had this regulation called duty of care, which is what the new EU regulation will be modeled on. We've seen, dozens and dozens of large French companies launching their responsible sourcing program, and indeed, some of them did it in a very basic way, just to comply. Some others said, "Okay, we've been discussing this for years. Okay, now the regulation is coming to force January 1st, 2018. Okay, let's have something really smart and sound in 2018." So.
Is sustainable, anytime we talk about supply chains, right, the instant thought is always what's effectively your first tier. So the companies that you're selling to, the companies you're directly buying from. Is sustainability also an initiative that is starting to become, or is already, multi-tier? So where companies might be hearing from their customers, we want to know what you're doing around sustainability because we're looking into our supply chain. And we as a company might be looking back and saying to our suppliers, what are your suppliers doing? Because we're trying to understand multi-tier from that perspective. Are we sort of branching out beyond the first tier in sustainability?
Yes. So it's I would say it's always tier 2, sometimes even more. So one of the reasons it's growing so quickly is indeed the question is most of the time not what are you doing from a sustainability perspective, but what are you doing with your own vendors? And if I just take a pragmatic or concrete example, the EcoVadis score, which we are giving to companies all over the planet, roughly 25% of the score is linked to your own supply chain. And in some sectors, like if you're a wholesaler for a retailer, if you're a distributor or a trader or wholesaler, then it's not going to be 25%, it's going to be 75%.
Okay.
So indeed, we've seen so many programs where Unilever is asking their packaging suppliers, okay, what are you doing from this and that and that, and can you tell us what your suppliers are doing? And then the packaging company will turn to Alcan or Alcoa or whatever. So yes, you have this the concept that reputational risks are you don't really care whether the supplier was in the news for Apple last week, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3. You only care about the fact that they are supplying in some form. They are providing services to Apple. So make things really cascade very quickly. And then you have this other concept, which is much more complex, which is it's not about suppliers or suppliers, but you need to look at the end of the supply chain or at the beginning of the supply chain. There was, you have big discussion or big challenges, for example, on commodities such as palm oil or mica, in mica in beauty or in cosmetics or in automotive. And then it's becoming very complex because, for example, automotive company, they're asked to identify, to ensure that the suppliers in this case will be 5 or 6 levels up, which is ultimately digging for mica in the ground, is having normal ethical practices. So, and this part is very difficult to solve. But already suppliers of suppliers, this first level, that's already a big driver of change.
So we've certainly covered a lot of ground, and I think it's very clear that sustainability is both absolutely critical and a hugely complicated effort. And when I think specifically about procurement as a whole, or that smaller group of people that we had talked about that may have some sort of responsibility, it also occurs to me that in most cases, very few people are coming to that type of role with a specific educational background or even significant experience working in that type of role. What tend to be the knowledge or talent related investments that companies need to make in sustainability in order to not only get the results that they're looking for, but also make sure that they are thinking strategically about the data and the insights that they have access to because of platforms like EcoVadis?
Indeed, sustainability is can be a very complicated topic, but I wouldn't to scare your readers either. Now you have the toolkit for responsible sourcing or the solutions for responsible sourcing, is available today. When companies were pioneering this, like HP, 15 years ago, you had to write the book, and it was, or you had to start from blank page, and that was indeed complicated. Now, most of the companies are very happy to share what they are doing, share their code of conduct, share their policies, share their best practices, and you have data providers or tools such as EcoVadis, which are able to make this complex topic very easy to grasp. So, as a result, when we look at sustainable supply chain managers or responsible sourcing managers, some of them are technical. Indeed, some of them will come with a sustainable background, but those we see are the most successful. They're actually those who are really good at change management and program management, and with limited resources and smart, policies and smart communication, being able to drive change in an organization with thousands of purchasing managers and tens of thousands of suppliers. So I think the number one skill, today is not so much. If I was a chief procurement officer hiring a sustainable procurement manager, more than technical expertise on the topic, I will look at this, change management, program management skills, because that's what makes a big difference. We see guys who are really focused on nitty-gritty details of specific regulations or KPIs and so on. Okay, you can discuss with experts for years, and at the end of the year, having assessed 5 suppliers, or you can have a much smarter approach, try to leverage some of the existing programs, start to have a very positive and smart communication, and at the end of the year, having driven a real impact with 1,000 suppliers.
Well, that's good to hear, because it's always heartening to hear about a situation where, at the end of the day, what you really need is very smart people that are willing to work incredibly hard. I mean, if there's any problem that can be solved in that way, it comes within reach of the companies and teams that are willing to make whatever that initiative happens to be a priority. So that's incredibly encouraging to hear, because it also shortens the lead time to actually making progress and getting those results. So as we kind of wind down, if I can ask you one last question, what would you say is next around sustainability? Now, that might be, what do you personally see as being sort of the next up and coming trend, or what are you as EcoVadis, the company, preparing for in the market at large? But what would you advise chief procurement officers to be on the lookout, to be prepared for, to be starting to work on over the next, say, 2 to 4 years?
One thing is for sure, carbon and decarbonization of supply chain. This is coming really, really fast. Basically, we have 10 years to make a U-turn in terms of, greenhouse gas trajectory of our economies. Supply chain are 80% of those emissions. Regulations are coming, pressure from your customers and so on. So what is called a scope 3 carbon or supply chain carbon, it's going to be a major topic for the next couple of years. We want to bring our contribution. We are launching in Q1 a new carbon action module, which is a data platform to help measure and decarbonize supply chain. But of course, plenty of other initiatives will be needed. So that's a big topic. I think another one on digitalization. It's the convergence or leveraging, big data, artificial intelligence. Lots of data start to be available on sustainability and supply chain. And I think an opportunity for firms like Sievo is also to combine spend data with EcoVadis data, with other type of data feed, smart AI and so on, and try to get new insight out of this, and for product innovation or for identify future risks. So lots of things are moving. And maybe the last one, it's around convergence of sustainable finance and supply chain. So, finance is greening itself at an incredible pace, like a number one focus of asset managers and investors and banks today seems to be adding some ESG component to their whatever product they have. This has also an impact on supply chain. We are launching new programs now to do sustainable supply chain finance or to provide innovative financing to the more sustainable suppliers. So there is an opportunity for CPOs to leverage this huge appetite of asset managers and trillions of dollars want to get invested in more sustainable assets. To also use these to transform their supply chains.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, part of our deep dive into procurement data ecosystems series in partnership with Sievo and Buyers Meeting Point. All the episodes will be available as they are published, alongside an accompanying series ebook at artofprocurement.com/data series. That's artofprocurement.com/data series.